Hello and welcome to the Beginner's Handbook. I'm Jordan.
I'm Jamie.
And in this episode we're going to be talking about unfair scenarios or events or concepts in games.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like, life isn't necessarily fair at all times, and games are pretty much the same as well. So we'll be looking at... we'll be looking at it from the player's point of view for most of it. And then towards the end, we'll do a sort of step back, and then we'll look at it from a GM's point of view, and maybe why things that maybe at first appear unfair aren't necessarily unfair. So we'll kind of look at that as well, I think.
Yeah, totally. So I think that just leads us straight into the usual opening questions that we have. So for players, we'd like to know if you have ever found yourselves in an unfair situation. How did you find it? Did you think it was good? Did you enjoy it? Was it just a pain? Did it put you off? Or did you just, it can be bad luck sometimes. Sometimes it feels unfair, and it's just like the last 2 weeks of playing games, I think I've rolled above 10 twice, like in 2 weeks of like games with one of the groups I play with. So, and it's not the case it's been unfair, but however, if you've been in a position that's unfair, how's that been for you? But from a GM's perspective, have you ever run a game that's unfair? What were the reasons behind it? Or have you ever had a whoops moment in your game where it's been unfair, but maybe accidentally unfair? It'd be just good to know a bit more about what you guys have had your experiences with.
Yeah, I think me personally, the thing that I'm looking forward to most is the whoops moments. I think that's going to be the best part of the answers coming back in.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I know I had a whoops moment with was when I was playing, it was Alien with a group of people, and somebody just came up who was new, never played the game, doesn't like horror, doesn't like violence. Alien is horror, is violent, is hardcore, and is a game. And man, she gets so demolished in that game. I was like, well, I'm being true to the Alien game, so I need to do it. That's just one of my examples. They enjoyed it in the end, but I think it was a shock.
Yeah. Here was me thinking it was going to be about that time that you ran Alien and that you never blew up the ship.
Yeah, that's right, but that was a communication thing, I think, more about... Actually, that would be something to talk about.
It would be, yeah.
Yeah, we'll go into detail on that later on. I completely forgot about that, and it was only 2 weeks ago or something.
I know.
But anyway, so cool.
Yeah, so if you do want to answer any of those questions, or maybe even pose your own question for us to either ask in a future episode or for us to answer, then you can do that in our different social media channels that we've got. So there's a Facebook page, there is Instagram if you want to be trendy, there's Twitter there's Discord, and I'm maybe forgetting somewhere.
I think you may have them all.
Okay,
yeah.
I've got them all. Yeah.
But I think we've got so many. There's also, if you want to hear, or if you're watching, obviously, or responding on YouTube, that's where you'll find this video.
YouTube.
Yeah, well, I thought you said that one.
No, I forgot about that completely.
Yeah.
YouTube, yep, comments underneath there as well.
Yeah, you can actually watch us on Spotify as well, but if whatever other platform that you listen to podcasts on, we're probably on like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts
Google,
and things.
Yeah.
So, cool, that kind of takes us straight in then. So, actually, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so if you ever find yourself in a situation which you're thinking, this is unfair, first thing that you should probably do is just hit pause for a second, just take a step back and just think about what's going on. Again, depending on how kind of involved you are with your character, if it's D&D or whatever else, or if it's campaign you've been playing for a while, or if it's been building up to
the set's falling to pieces, but it's okay.
Yeah, or if it's been something that's been building up and it's still falling to pieces.
It's a ghost.
If it's been building up to some like major event, then if you're expecting it to go one way and it maybe doesn't, then you just take that moment to sit and think and go, right, is this unfair, or am I really invested in this situation, or is something happened that I didn't think was going to happen. So I feel like it's unfair, but it's actually not. So that to me is always going to be your kind of first step when you're feeling that you're getting the short end of the stick. Just sit, pause, assess, and ask yourself, is it really unfair, or am I just a bit disappointed at the way things have worked out?
Yeah, it's actually a good point in doing that, because there's certainly games that I've been in where it's almost kind of set up. Like the whole point of the game is you're supposed to puzzle solve for like a boss fight, let's say, and there's weaknesses you're supposed to exploit. But if you're not engaging a lot in that, sometimes, I've been in games where there's people that thought things were super clear, like these clues and answers to these big riddles of the game or whatever. And then you end up getting totally pummeled, and it feels really unfair. But then that's where, as a player, I've sat in a seat and take that step back and just go, right. And I think actually that was something I spoke to the GM about. Maybe we'll talk to that in a minute. But yeah, it's worth just taking that wee pause, because it's not, your GM's not always against you. You will have some that might be, but I think we might cover it in other episodes about how you might handle a thing like that. But the answers, the spoiler is communication. We're going to keep saying it, and we'll continue to say it. But yeah, definitely, it's one of these things, because there's no point getting stressed out over it if it's something small they might have not realised at the time. But yeah.
I'm just laughing at the set falling to pieces. But yeah, and again, like Jordan's saying, it's 99.9% of problems, whether this is in real life or in a virtual world or during a game, it's going to get solved by communication. And again, we're going to jump onto that in a little bit more detail further in, so we'll not say too much on it just now, but that's, if you take anything away from anything we ever talk to you about, just talk to the GM, talk to the player, talk to each other, whatever it is. That's going to fix most of your problems.
Yeah, so that kind of moves us on to, maybe we'll do the examples a bit later. So that leads us into just like, well, we've taken a pause back. Okay, so what do we do then from that? Well, I think the answer is, now I kind of alluded to it a minute ago, that's seeking clarification about what's actually going on. You don't need to do it during the game. You can just have fun with it, let it go, whatever it may be, and just talk to people about it after. Like even with what Jamie was saying about the Alien game, I won't spoil it in case we do talk about it, but there was a decision that Jamie's guy had agreed to have made. No, I won't spoil it. I'll leave it for the game. It was awesome. It was awesome though.
Yeah.
Or it would have been awesome.
Basically, to break it down as short as possible, so we don't dwell on it too much, and so that we can talk about it in more detail. I'd made the decision at the end of game 1 and kind of triggered it at the start of game 2, or at least I thought I did. And then by game 3, towards the end, when things were all ending, like, it suddenly became really clear, hang on a minute, the decision I made doesn't appear to have happened, what's going on? A quick kind of couple of private messages backwards and forwards, and somewhere between the end of game 1 to the end of game 3, the translation was lost, because the worst part about the whole thing is, as well as during the game, and try to put the message forward so that the other players didn't know, because I had my own ulterior motives. I was also talking to Jordan about it in between times of the game. So over the space of 2.5 weeks or something, like out of game we were talking about it, but the two of us were completely out of sync with what we were talking about, and it meant that an epic finale kind of ended up.
Oh, it's totally still epic, different. But not quite. Well, I mean, I think the result. I think the result probably would have been very similar, but I mean, you wouldn't have known that at the time. But that's where we did clarify that later on, or at least we started to. I don't think we ever actually decided what was happening, but that's what we'll maybe go into more another time.
We've not officially pointed the finger yet.
I do know what the issue was, for the record, but I think it actually might be better to talk about it on this, because it's actually an interesting. It's one of these things. It's more about. It's not even like it was a poor communication or anything. It's just there's different things going on, different priorities, different assumptions that are made on both sides. But that's where you talk about it and you clarify. It wasn't like Now, if Jamie was one of the players, let's say you had a whole reign of experiences. Like I know there's been players that have played games with folk and felt like they've been hard done by for like many games, and it's put them off playing games. And then they finally come to a group that they like and go, "Oh, this is actually dead fun." But let's say that was using that example that we just said there. If you were a player that had a bunch of bad experiences and came in, you might just think the person's doing you over for no reason, But really, we did clarify it to some extent, and we know that wasn't the case. The events, the triggering points and stuff wasn't like worked out and stuff, but we knew what had happened and we knew there was other things going on. Yeah. So, but then Jamie, I'm assuming, has came away going, all right, it wasn't just wanting to totally screw me over, because we talked about it, And the thing is, it was also a blast, It still ended up being, it was literally a blast. But it was, the thing is, it happens though, and these sort of things do happen. So that's why it is worth pausing for breath and then trying to clarify it at a later point, because otherwise you'll just get yourself stressed out.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's a bit off that we're talking about this situation that happened, but we're not actually talking about it, because we're wanting to talk about it in more detail at another time. But if I hadn't paused for breath, if I hadn't sought clarification kind of during the game and then after the game, then I could have so easily taken a lot of that out of context, like really, really, really easily. But the fortunate thing for me is that, and again, this is something as well. If you know the DM GM out with just playing your games, then chances are you're going to trust them to whatever degree, which then means that if something happens and you go, that's unfair, you're more likely to go, right, hang on a minute. You're going to pause for breath and sit and think, because you know them, you blah blah blah, whatever, and then go and get the clarification, and then afterwards go, right, okay, I've not overreacted, I've not taken things out of context. Whereas if it's a new group, then you might be less sure of that, and so on and so on. So if you do know your GM quite well, and again, if you know them out with the table in the game, then again, a lot of the kind of unfair situations hopefully kind of take care of themselves and resolve themselves.
Yeah, and that's why it's actually it'd be really nice to hear from people that anyone that is listening that runs games, especially if you do a lot of ones that's maybe online or at a comic shop or something like that, or whatever your tabletop shop you go to is, because that's where this sort of stuff will happen more often probably. Because I've certainly, like we spoke about Alien there, but it's the first ever game of Alien I ever done. It was very much built to just the guy wanted to kill everyone, so he just done it, you know what I mean? He went, right, what time is it? He's like, cool, kill, and just literally going through the Discord thing and just killing everyone. So, and sure, that might have been part of his game, but that wasn't what we were expecting, and he was new to us, so it was a surprise. I think there was a couple people that had actually played with him a lot, so that was okay with them. But for the other 4 of us, or whatever that was, I think it was 6 of us in total, so it would be 4. It was kind of just like, it was a bit like, and we chatted to the guy after it and said, this, and he explained it. It still kind of didn't, it took the sting out a bit, but you were a bit kind of like, was that it? But that was because it was a new group, well, for me and a couple others, or a few others. So we'd definitely like to hear from you if you've got a story like that. It's a good point. It's a good thing to talk about.
And kind of, again, kind of look at more examples and kind of general examples of what we're talking about in a little bit, and we'll look at how each of the kind of different things that we're talking about will relate to it. But if you've paused for breath, if you've got the clarification, and after the clarification you're sitting and you're thinking, I still think that I've been given a raw deal here, then at that point, and again, I think this, out of everything that we're going to talk about, is going to be the one that most people are going to kind of maybe disagree with, well, me anyway, in this, is to let it slide, but just for now. And like ultimately, if you feel that you've been hard done by, should you let it slide? Well, no, you shouldn't. But there's other things that might be going on. So again, won't go into too much detail about it, but with the game that me and Jordan were just talking about a minute ago there, again, the danger was that I started going down that route and I started feeling hard done by. But
yeah, if you were a new person as well, that would have been, I mean, for us, we know each other, it's not a problem, but if it was a new person, it's possible.
Yeah, it's magnified. Yeah, whatever they... I think the thing is, like, whatever a new person feels is going to be magnified because they've not got the context of you as an individual, and they don't have past experience with that game group and, you know, whatever else. So, I mean, ultimately, and I'll say this just now because we haven't really properly talked about that yet, we haven't properly dissected it. I put myself in the right, let it slide. Because, you know, I was upset. My big moment got taken away from me. So I went, right, just let it slide. Something will have happened. It'll be easy enough to explain. I just don't know what it is yet. I don't want to interrupt the flow of the game. We'll get to the post-mortem at some point. And we've not properly done that yet, but I've kind of got enough that I kind of know the skeleton of it before we've kind of looked at the detail. So I put myself in that position, and then ultimately what it meant for me at that point is that we haven't had a big argument and a fallout. You know, we're still turning up and doing the games that we're doing. We're still doing the podcast. That hasn't got binned, you know. So there's lots of other things that's happening, and basically the reason I'm saying one of the things to consider doing is just letting it slide for that time is so that if there is something that's happened that even though you've taken a step back, even though you've thought about it, even though you've sought a bit of clarification, that there's still something you're misinterpreting, there's something you're taking out of context, or there's something that you've missed, you're giving that other person the benefit of the doubt that they haven't put you in that situation, they haven't been totally unkind, totally unfair to you. It's just been an accident. You're giving them that benefit of the doubt. If it continues to happen in different other areas, that's the point for me then that you go, right, well, now you need to stop it and now you need to move on and do something else. But I mean, what do you think in that?
No, I think the same sort of thing, and like we're giving a bit of an example, we're kind of exaggerating how it can, so it can fit what we're talking about. But I think it's always worth actually letting things slide, especially if it's a first time offence. Who cares? You know, the fact is, if you don't let it slide, it's you that's going to feel bad about it, and I can guarantee you, well, at least the GM, but potentially everyone at the table will not even know what you're talking about if you complained about it. Like, now our example is a bit different, and we're trying to big it up so it fits here, but there's plenty of examples where we'll maybe talk about the concepts next, like unfair fights and stuff, but there's definitely cases where, you know, something might happen, it just feels unfair to you, but you'll be able to tell if you let it slide and just give it a minute, like doing your pause for breath and stuff, you'll see how other people react to it, you know. And if it's really unfair at the table, you'll get other people kind of going, like, and you'll see it, they'll tell you, or they'll text you or whatever it is. But for the most part, it's like, I've sat in loads of games where there was unfair things that had happened, and I'm just like, who cares, whatever. And if I've had 6 series of decisions in games that have had this problem, I've just said to the guy, like, what's happening with this? This feels like nothing's happening. It feels like we've got no decision-making skills or autonomy, or we're not getting to explore, you know, whatever it may be. But just remember, if you let it slide, you can let it slide for a night. Give it a couple of nights before you start complaining, I would say. But if you've got a complaint there as well, saying it at some point. But just be aware that potentially other people at the table might not have a clue what you're talking about, because sometimes it just feels like it's against you, when in most cases it's just there's something that's went missing, or maybe you've missed something, or maybe maybe it's another player's made an unfair action against you or something, maybe they've missed something you've said or the GM has, whatever it may be. It's basic stuff half the time, and normally it just kind of gets resolved and waxed over and it's all great and happy from there on. So
Yeah.
I think we'll maybe talk about a couple of concepts then, because there was one I was just speaking to you before we started recording, one in Pathfinder, but how do you feel about rigged fights? It's talking about unfair situations. Now, I know we've talked about what to do in an unfair situation, but let's break down like concepts behind them. Like, what's the sort of an example of an unfair situation? Fights are a good one, because that's a lot of the contention is usually in fights.
Yeah, because and again, it depends on how invested you are into your character as much as anything. If you have taken your character from, a puny level 1 to a mighty level 17 or whatever, and you've spent either a lot of time, or you've done, like, there's been some moment that's happened in a game that's, the group still talks about that involved you and that character, and then you end up in a fight and you're going through it. At some point, if you're that invested, you're no longer playing a game where you happen to get into a scrap. You are there and you are fighting for that character's survival. You don't want them to die. You're feeling responsible. Every move that you make is putting them in danger. So at that point, if you get a sniff that maybe the fight was, it started out that there was only supposed to be 4 other combatants, and then mysteriously another 2 appear, and then they go down quite quick, and then mysteriously another 2 appear, and at that point you can start going, oh, hang on a minute, this is unfair, this is rigged, this is whatever. So and I think that's the thing, there's a difference between a fight being unfair, that's 2 on 1, but a fight being rigged is it's 2 on 1 and the 2 of them have got a shotgun each or whatever, and
like think your 2 level 1 characters coming up against 2 liches, and it's like, you've got no chance. There's no chance. It's totally against you, and it's not. It's unfair and it's rigged. There's no way it's not.
And although there might be people there going, well, what's the difference? So you're not splitting hairs.
But probably
probably, but unfair. If it's an unfair fight, to me, there's still a glimmer of hope of getting out of it. Whereas if it's rigged, it's like, oh, that's for your pick what you want your coffin to be made out of. Mahogany is quite nice, That's the difference, I think, between it. And ultimately, in a fight, the pause for breath is the thing that you're gonna be probably most reliant on. And the reason that I'm saying that is that because it can sometimes be a really fine margin between, bad luck, a bad roll, just using your abilities previously, which then means that you're lacking and you're not at your your character's not at full combat readiness, if you like, or drifting into the realms of unfair and rigged. And ultimately, you're only going to know that based on whatever the situation is, and combats can, they can be, like Jordan was saying earlier on, there could be a puzzle element to it. There could be some detective work you need to do. There could be, it could literally just be a numbers game. It could be unexpected for the GM as well, if you decide to go to a place that wasn't prepped, wasn't planned, and you rob somebody's shop or whatever because you're thinking you're high and mighty, and then the whole town turns on you in a mob, or all sorts of different things could happen, and at that point you need to go, right, okay, well, is the fight went from challenging and I've been on the wrong end of a pummeling, or was it unfair from the start, or was it rigged? And I'm trying to think of any sort of combat and any sort of fight that happened with me, and the one that's jumping out is the one that, if you've seen our episode on player versus player combat, we'll have talked about, and it was when you got the enemy NPC that turned out to be an enemy PC.
It was me the
Yes.
whole time.
Yeah, so at that point, like, it started off, it was myself and the Chameleon, for anybody who's been following along with the podcast before and knows who the Chameleon is. For anybody who doesn't, the Chameleon makes up our sort of most regular group and is also part of our most regular long-term campaign. So what had happened is, like, the week or two before, you had work stuff that you had to do and whatever else. So Jordan wasn't there for a week or two. So rather than hit pause and then going back to the campaign in a week or two's time, Jordan went, no, carry on. If there's a story element for doing it, carry on, and then I'll pick it up when I'm back and we'll see. So that's what we done. Myself and the Chameleon went along to do this sort of side quest, and we were doing it, and then Jordan, and I can't remember if your time freed up quicker than you expected, or if this just, as usually happens with us, we overran the kind of scheduled time.
I think it
that
may have
the
been
DM
overrun, because I think it was maybe 3 weeks I was away, and then it was the 4th week. I was something like that.
Yeah,
But anyway, I was
yeah.
there for whatever reason. So
so then Jordan went, well, I'll let you finish the story arc, and I'll just be an observer, and I'll see what's been going on.
that was the plan, by the way.
Yeah, and betrayal. So that's what we were told. That was fine. We were going through, myself and the Chameleon. It then ends up, combat happens, as usually does. So it was the two of us. He was more of a kind of ranged sort of, what was it at the time? Was he?
I can't even remember who he was.
I know who he was, but the character he was also changed class twice, I think.
This was the ranger type.
Yeah, that was it. He was a ranger at this point, and he was a ranged ranger. So I was more of a melee kind of type fighter. So I was like, okay, so I was slightly ahead of him. He was slightly further back, and we were working out our tactics and going through. So there was like a big chasm in the middle, and then we were kind of moving around the sides, and there was a few people, and then I noticed, hang on a minute, I'm starting to get circled here, and I went, okay, well, can't really do much, because if I leave, it'll be an attack of opportunity, but there's 2 or 3 people here, so that's 2 or 3 attacks, and, I'm kind of trying to puzzle it out. So I go, right, I'll stand my ground and try keep going, and I'll try figure it out. And then as it turns out, Jordan kicks into the battlefield as the main boss enemy. So then I was pulling out every single tactic that I could.
I accept that big fighter ability, amplify everything but that.
Yeah,
but then there's a risk thing with that,
there
and
was a risk
I get it.
to that, which was use it and lose it, basically.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I was trying to balance that up.
When to use it.
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out what to do, and the kind of the short version of that, without dragging that on any longer than we already have, is that I'd recently got a magic item which had some abilities that I wasn't. It wasn't in my mind.
That's right.
So there was 1 or 2 things I could have done there. I, for the past year and a half, had misinterpreted a rule, which meant I could have used that to save my neck. And as well as that, if earlier on, like I sat and I worked out at the end, and it was literally, I was like 1 roll away from the fight turning the opposite direction. That's how close it came. It was literally 1 roll. So that 1 roll, if that had went, and even earlier than that, if I'd gambled with the attacks of opportunity, then it could have went different. So at that point, because I had some bad rolls there as well, and I managed to kind of keep going,
Yeah.
and I managed to drag the fight out for a long, long time. At that point, I went, right, okay, was this unfair? Was it rigged? Or, and you're thinking about that because you've spent a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was, playing a character, and you're sitting going, right, what happened? What could have been different and things? So taking that little pause for breath, I went, right, I don't think it was unfair because the two of us managed to deal with basically every person on it, bar the character that Jordan was. And even then, we managed to get him down to a very small amount of hit points. So I don't think it was rigged because we very nearly won it.
Yeah.
I don't think that particular bit of combat was unfair because I looked back at what I'd done and I went, right, I made some bad decisions in amongst that. It was probably right to the cusp of what was a kind of fair challenge, and I think it was right into that kind of 99.9% level. But that's a time when I've actually sat and done it and then went, do you know what? There's more about me than anybody else is why that's all happened. So, and again at that point I could have just went off in a tirade. What? You were only supposed to be here and watching, and now this, and now that, and and kind of throw the laptop across the room or whatever, and just storm out. Yeah,
but this is the thing as well. Like, especially this is, I think, the difference, because some people might go, "Oh, but it was just a fight and you died, big deal." For these guys, it's a bit different because now we talked about going from level 1 to 17. We went from like level 3 to 8. But that took over a year and a half to do, which I think was probably way too long in retrospect. Like, at all, I think one level up took us about 3 months to get. Well, I think it took me 3 months to get to level 8 or 9. It was like, and this was like every week gaming, so it was way too long. Regardless, the level up system was taking way too long in that game, in my opinion. But the thing is, it's a case where if you're the person that gets the punished side, you're the person that gets the kind of long end of the stick. And it can feel unfair even if it isn't. I think the difference with your thing is it was so, not only did you lose this guy that we would spend lots of time with, and you'd spent a lot of time with, both making it, advancing it, and then playing it. It was just a case where it was supposed to be a side quest became end of character. So now, sure, I don't think it was particularly rigged, like you're saying, or unfair specifically, but it's still unpleasant to lose that. So it's worth keeping that in mind, and why it's so important just to give yourself a second before you start moaning about it. For example, not saying you would have moaned about it, but certainly I've seen people moan during games about things similar to that, and it's just because you lost a big character, and actually it's more the kind of celebration of actually that, how good you've had that character. Not I'm saying you, but like a lot of the time it is just a case of actually the reason it sucks is because you've lost something you've been really into, rather than it being somebody out to get you. Although I suppose I technically was out to get you because that was what the agenda was given to me. But that's the case why it is important just to give yourself a second just to go, right, and maybe it wasn't supposed to be, let's just get rid of this character, because that wasn't it. And you know that, but other people might be in similar situations and maybe be sitting on the other side of the fence.
I sat and I done a wee quick bit of maths, and it's like 1.25 levels every 6 months on average. So it's even worse than what you.
It's probably not far off it. There were certainly a couple of levels up that took at least a couple months, but then that's partially why it's really frustrating when your character goes down in that game, because that's maybe the only thing that I would have said was unfair about that whole game specifically. Because it's like you want to progress, you want to get these cool guys, you do it, you invest the time, you get the rewards, and your guy lost those rewards. The problem was they were so hard earned to get to a level that's fairly trivial, considering, it's not trivial, it's a higher level, 7 and 8, but compared to like level 10 where you might, or 8 when you get a new feat to try and stuff.
But it's that kind of thing that earlier on, essentially what I'm I'm taking from what you're saying is earlier on you're expecting it to be a bit quicker and then start to slow down. Because I can't remember off the top of my head how many experience points you need to level up each time, but every time you look at it, the number gets proportionately bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
I do expect it to go longer. The difference with that game was every level up took a long time. And if you broke down, like, I don't like XP that much. I prefer milestones because I can level people up quicker with them, basically. But certainly if you'd done milestones, I felt like it was milestones that we never leveled up for. If you'd done XP, we should have probably been at least a couple levels higher than that. I think there was a lot of custom creatures, so I don't know what they would have worked out as. But I've certainly ran monsters that were harder than what we fought, or sorry, not as hard as things that we fought, and were offering significant levels of XP for leveling up and things like that. So, but then that's partially why that was probably particularly, it had a bit of a sting to it, because it's like so hard for not a lot of progress, but particularly along near the end. So was there not assassination attempts and all that just before that? I can't remember. It's so long ago. So all this other stuff that was out to get, isn't it? It turns out it was me that done it in the end. But
pretty much.
So I think for me, like, in terms of the unfair and rigged combat, I do put them in the same camp. I know you can kind of go, well, one's like you can't win it, and one's that there's still a chance. I mean, the bottom line is, for me, if you've got combat that's super brutal in your games as a GM, there should really be a reason for it. And in terms of a concept, I don't think it's a bad thing to have really horrible, difficult, I should say, combat. It's depending on the use case, though. Doing it for no reason, for example, like, let's say, using your example there, now imagine, I don't know if it was like a leveled character, I can't remember, but let's say it was, and I was double the level you were when I was fighting you. That would just be like, there's no point in even doing the fight, because you've got no chance against a character like that. So that's the sort of thing I think it's not really worth doing at all. I think that's a bad move, because it makes players go, what's the point? Now, what is the point? But it depends on the sequence. Like Curse of Strahd, near the beginning of that game, you've got bits that you can do and little threads that you can follow. You can go to various things that will just kill players, like completely kill them. But if it happens early on, it's not a big deal, but it's partly there to give you an idea of the world. It's all very Eastern European folklore, but it's a brutal world. So it kind of serves a point, but it's in there. So if you do stumble across it at lower levels, it's not like people have played it for 8 months and died to something unfair. They've just died to something unfair at low levels when they've probably only put a few weeks into the game. So it's not as bad, but certainly the story reasons, I think, are good reasons for harder fights. But specifically unfair fights, or even fights that are totally rigged against you, are definitely worth doing in things like Call of Cthulhu, or games where it is supposed to be like that. If you fight a Shoggoth in Call of Cthulhu, it's going to suck your skin off and eat you and you're dead. Like, that's the way these games work. And if you've played these games, you know that you don't tend to want to fight a mythos creature. Same thing in Alien. You don't really want to fight an alien because you'll just die. Weirdly, no one really died to an alien in your game, which was slightly frustrating. Except, no, my sister did actually. She got kicked into it and it killed her.
She not died twice?
She died twice, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that. But then that game's built around, like, it's very asymmetric. If you look at older D&D, it's like that. Older Pathfinder, even Pathfinder 2E's harder than D&D in terms of survivability. But D&D's very much power fantasy and basically shrugging off injuries and after an 8-hour rest, which is fine.
It is but a scratch.
Yeah, exactly. But then, so that's what my feeling on kind of unfair fights is. There's, as long as there's a good reason for it, and as long, like the alien scenario we done, it's very much like expect your players to die, and here's like 16 NPCs or whatever it worked out as to give them cards. So they can just play a new character, and then as they get progress, more NPCs effectively unlock, which you can just give them. And it's very much like if they die as part of the game, that's fine. Just make sure that you're having fun with it. So the only time I draw the line with things like rigged fights is when there's like, one, there's absolutely no way they can survive without giving them a get out from it. You know, if you basically put someone in a room with Vecna and they're level 5 and they can't do anything but just fight them, then there's no point in the fight in the first place. You're as well just doing a narrative thing to kill them, you know, because what's the point? An example of an unfair fight would be Strange Aeons, a Pathfinder 1st edition game, which has a fight at the start of the game and you're totally screwed. But the whole point is that there's a story reason for it, and players aren't punished as a result of that. and they're also expected to be level 1. So you probably won't be so worried about dying if you had played through the whole campaign and then died the same way. That would be very different. But that's what I think about unfair fights in terms of the concept.
Yeah.
This is one that we spoke about, not in the podcast, but before. Give me your thoughts on doing leveling up at different rates, different times. As a concept, how do you feel about that? Do you think, what do you think about out of sync level ups?
I'm a bit iffy on it. Is the kind of the quick answer. If like somebody in the group does something above and beyond what everybody else has done, so if they have single-handedly taken on like 5 enemies and they've like protected like vulnerable NPCs and everybody else was stuck in a jail somewhere and they've done this by themselves or whatever, then you go, well, yeah, okay, because like they have done something that is justifiable of recognition out with the group. And that's the thing. Has anybody done something that is justifiably recognisable out with what the rest of the group has? And if you don't get a solid yes for that, then there's no point. And as well as that, you go, well, it's not really going to, as a GM, it's not going to make your life any easier. And as other players, you're going to be sitting there going, well, how does that work? And you're going to be left scratching your head. Because, I mean, the thing is, like, if there's, again, combat, and it's like, you've got four player characters versus 4 NPCs. 1 player character deals the final blow to 2 of the characters, and then players B and C deal the final blows to enemies C and D. And you've got player D there who hasn't killed anybody technically, but if you add up all the damage that everybody's done, then they've done the most damage across the board. So players A, B and C have all had the glory moment, but player D's the one that's been the most effective player. So within combat, then you go, well, situations like that can happen. And that's really quick and just off the top of my head. And again, might be a bit confusing because enemies A, B and C are, and players A, B, C and D. So, but the point I'm getting at from that is that within a fight, everybody's doing something. And it's very, very rare that you'll have somebody in a fight that's completely ineffective or as close to being completely ineffective. And the same thing as well for like the enemies that are attacking. In general, they're all going to be doing something. It's very rare that you'll get one that's just completely useless within that situation. So fight to fight to fight to fight. The danger is that a GM goes up at so-and-so is killed, like 5 times the amount as everybody else. And you go, well, is it that they've done 5 times the amount of work, or is it they've just been in the right place at the right time to get the recognisable moment? And I think that's the danger with stuff like that, that the big moment is the thing that people focus on rather than the work that was put in to achieve it. So I think that's a danger. And just in general for level ups and things as well, like looking at the milestone side of things rather than that would obviously be more like the combat kind of example that I gave would be more if you're basing it on like an XP weighted leveling up. If you're looking at it from the milestone point of view, then you go, well, the group have started together and have went to this point where they are just now, and they've all went on that journey, and they've all done different things along the road. So has anybody, again, like doing quest A to quest B to quest C to whatever, has anybody done something above and beyond during that? Has anybody went and done 4 times the amount of side quests that everybody else has done? And chances are they probably haven't, because everybody's going to be working towards the main objective with maybe 1 or 2 side shoots. So when it comes to that side of things as well, then you go, well, there's probably not a huge deal of room for it unless you've got a really, really kind of split party where you've got one person or one half are really, really proactive and the other half are quite conservative and quite reserved and don't like straying too far from the kind of the main story arc that the DM or GM's written down. So I think 9 times out of 10 out-of-sync level ups are probably a bad idea, and I'd probably go as far as saying a bad idea. And I would also think that 9 times out of 10 you're probably going to be clutching at straws to find the justification.
Yeah, I think the way that I see it, I just don't do them, full stop. I don't like them. I could see people's arguments for them, but I think you can reward people in other ways instead of just leveling up. But my problem with it, because this isn't with our dwarf game, although it has happened in that, but certainly there's, the guys that I do games with, I play with, even not run, where it was like there's weeks I've not been able to make it because of work and other commitments, and it's like I come and people have leveled up once or twice or whatever it was, and it's like yeah you just have to deal with it, and I'm kind of like, I get the idea, because it's like, oh, the people that are rewarded for being there. The problem is I then go in like going, oh, what's the point in me even bothering, because when I level up they're already 2 levels above me. It must have been 2 games. It was like 2 boss fights, I remember now. So I just was like, well, now everything's scaled up and now I'm super squishy in comparison to others. So it was just like, what's the point? I just don't really see the need for it. I do prefer... There's a case for XP and milestone levels up. I mean, the exception with leveling up progression would be if it was a system like Stars Without Number, which you get goals which have allocated XP levels. Same thing with Alien. You make agendas with your players, and if they work towards them, they get points. I think that's how they progress and stuff like that. So it's like objective-based leveling up, and it's on a per-character basis. That's the only time I ever see that actually working. Because if you feel like you're never getting your goals, you can always say to your GM, like, what can I do to level up? Because I'm struggling to level up, and it can work. Whereas when you're playing things like D&D, which is very much XP or milestones based, I don't think there's a case for it. I get people wanting to do it, but I've also seen people doing it because, oh, that guy I don't like, oh, he's not showing up and I'm annoyed at him. So he's not just me, but I've seen other people do it. And to be fair to the GMs that were running those games, it's like they've planned this big thing around this character being there, and now they're not showing up and blah blah, and then they've argued with them at later dates. But like the punishment was like not leveling them, and I'm just going, what's the point? Like, one, you need to track that now as a GM, and it's like, I've got enough to track. I mean, I run enough games during the week where I'm like, it's hard to keep on top of them full stop. But on the other side, I just want to make sure that I can give everybody... The best thing about D&D is, as tired as I'm getting with it sometimes, just because I play so much of it, it's so good because there's so much stuff you can learn and earn and use, like abilities. Same with Pathfinder, there's a lot of that going on. So it's fun to progress and try out the game. It's effectively like putting your DLC lock on something. If you do the leveling up difference or misbalanced or out of sync level up. So that's why I generally prefer milestone, although sometimes people say, oh, but that would be enough XP. But it's like, well, we've not done the milestones as a group, so tough. But at least with that approach, I make people go, like, they all level up, even if you didn't show up for a game. Like, if Jamie doesn't show up for 4 weeks and then the guys level up in that time, I'll just say everybody leveled up because you've met as a group the milestones. The way I see it, it's up to me as a GM to make your character useful during that time.
Yeah, rather than, they have a mysterious death in the family and they need to go and deal with it for 4 weeks. Yeah,
I mean, it's not like something you need to play. I would just say, like, I'm going to have your guy doing this and blah blah, and that's all. So
yeah, well, obviously you were aware this happened.
Yeah, that's it. Because I know, sure, it's good to reward players that go over and above, but rather, instead of leveling them up, I would just give them magic items or give them a reward or loads of money which nobody else gets access to, you know. Because leveling up is very different, and especially with like the dwarf game that we do, that leveling up is absolutely grueling. Mismatch and level up, I think, is actually a really poor design choice. I don't think it's a good move. It's different, like our guy's not been so bad for it, but I could see cases where if you took it to the extreme dials, it's like someone could be going for 4 or 5 levels. 4, 5, 6 nights or weeks where they don't level up, whereas everybody else is now up at, let's say, at level 10 and this guy's stuck at 9. But by the time you all level up again, that's me only catching up. And if it's going to take me over a month to level up, then it's like, I don't see the point. I'd rather just die and be given a new guy so I can try out stuff, you know. So, although I would really like to hear someone else's opinion on it, I just don't like doing it because conceptually I'm going, it kind of devalues another person's character over and above everybody else's. The other exception to the out of sync level up, we spoke about goals, goal-based leveling up. It's on a character basis, but Call of Cthulhu is a good one where it's actually just as you play the game, you constantly level up, if you want to call it that. So you succeed in a check, you get an improvement check at the end of your game or at the end of the night.
But ultimately, that's the system that's doing that rather than you as the GM. You don't have control over that.
Yeah, so things like D&D don't have that.
That kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, the Pathfinder might actually give you that. Is they build in leveling up your expertise, your proficiency levels effectively, and that's actually maybe a nice, maybe out of the book or kind of homebrewy thing to reward people with. Maybe give them expertise and a skill in D&D or whatever it is. But it's certainly, I really hate it. Like, out of sync level ups, mostly because every time I've seen it implemented, it's just not been very good. And out of the 5-6 years I've played D&D, I've never seen a good implementation of it. Like, sure, people could go, I'm okay with that because I've not been there, but then if they're okay with it, cool, but I just still think it'd be cooler if you just gave them new skills that they could use. Whereas Call of Cthulhu has its own, just as you do skills, you get better at them. Stars Without Numbers is goal based. Delta Green is actually if you fail, unless I'm mixing Cthulhu or Delta Green up. In Delta Green, if you fail a skill, you actually get to improve it. I think it's either by D3 or just like every period or after every game you get an extra point in it, i.e. you're learning through mistakes. So somebody might be much better in other skills, but it's not like D&D where you've got like potentially 12 more hit points over somebody and you've got new feats. Anyway, so that's my rant on that over, because it's just I've seen it very badly implemented, and I've been at the behest of interesting GMs who've done it, and it's been a bit of a mess, to be honest. Whereas the whole point for me is games is about fun, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with what Jordan was saying there as well is that we've talked about it in previous episodes, like figuring out what your player's 100% is. So by that, and again, we talked about it in more detail in previous episodes, that if you've got a player that goes, I can only make it like once a month, but once a month they are there every single time, then, you know, if you look at that as a percentage, they're 100%, whereas if you look at somebody who goes, oh yeah, I can be there every week, but when you look at it, they're there every other week, well, they're only there 50% of the time that they can actually be there. So in your case, I'm guessing it was again another work thing or something without going into too much detail of it.
It was actually to do with this.
Oh, right, okay.
I was editing.
Sorry.
No, it's just, it was one of these, it was between, there was a work thing, I was actually up north, and then there was this other week I was just a backlog of this stuff, so, but I just said, look, I've got other commitments. And the guy's like, that's cool, and then it's like, oh yeah, everyone else leveled up twice, and I was like, alright, I was okay with it, but as the game went on, I was like, I get killed in like 3 hits, like, because it was like big evil monster that just attacks you for some reason. I was like,
nobody else.
I was like, okay, so I'm dead because I'm like potentially not getting my 18 extra hit points and stuff. I was like, cool, whatever. I let it slide, like we talked about.
But ultimately with that, you, like, from my kind of viewpoint of it, you got punished because
punished for not being there, basically.
Yeah, and you know, it wasn't that you just decided not to turn up, it was that you you had work to do and that you were away, like physically not in your hometown, and other different things. So I mean that's a bit naughty, I would say.
But then this is the thing, like it's like even the people that only come 50% of their time. I mean, there's somebody I know that basically every night before a game he texts you 5 minutes before and says I can't make it, as if we're surprised because we've not seen him in about 4 months. But it's like I wouldn't even punish him by not leveling him up, because I'm like, who cares? Like, if he comes, we know he's not coming, so when he comes, just give him a character at that level, and you don't need to worry about scaling stuff. Just keeps it easy. So that kind of takes us on to the last kind of concept then, because I spoke about like rewarding people, and it's magic items for everyone bar you. Now I mentioned maybe a reason, rather than it being a bar you thing, it's more like you get this because you done this. And that's like if somebody has went over and above, maybe rather than leveling them, I would give them a sweet bit of loot, So I see it being good in that sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of basically, again, penalising one person, I don't like that.
Yeah, and this is the thing that you need to be careful about as well, because like with our group, right, if one of us ends up with a magic item, everybody else goes, it's pretty cool, what can I do? Oh, it can do this, that. Everybody's pleased for that person, because again, more than likely they've figured something out, or they've done something impressive, or whatever it is, right? They're getting it for a reason. But the danger is when the next person gets one, then the person who hasn't got one sitting there going, oh, what about me? And and then if that goes on for a bit and goes on for a bit and goes on for a bit, I think being the last person to get something out of a group is harder than the first person getting it and the rest of the group being there, because most people in that boat, or most people in that situation, are the same, that they've also not got it. But when it flips the other way and it's a case of most people have got something that you don't have, I think that's when the danger is going to appear, that you're going to get people feeling like they're hard done by.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, like you said, like we've had plenty of games where all of us, like, so me, Jamie, and the other guy that we play with in our dwarf game, like the other guy might get loot and we won't see it. You might get loot later. We're not bothered by it. We know there's great reasons. The GM we've got is brilliant. So we're not worried.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that we also know each other really, really well. But there's certainly cases like if you go and fight a boss, let's say, and it's like, oh, you get a great item and you get one, but you don't get anything. Similar to almost penalising them, like we talked about the uneven levelling up. It's the same sort of issue.
Yeah.
So that's it. You better have a good reason if you're going to do it like that. Because, I mean, I suppose like the guy I spoke about, it doesn't show up for 4 months, but he always tells you every week he's not coming. He's like, oh, I didn't realise. It's going, yeah, you did. But him not getting magic items, it's not like you're going, screw this guy in particular. He's just not there. So to me, it makes sense that he doesn't get the items. But you can always give him something if everyone else has got like 50 on them, Well, I suppose you can only tune to 3 at a time. But
doesn't mean you can't have them in your pockets.
Doesn't mean, and I think Pathfinder, you get lots more. I can't remember, so I was looking at the rules today for it. But I just think if you're going to do something that's asymmetric, into like that, like loot or levels, I just think why is it you're doing it in the first place? But I don't. But the only reason I would think they should do that, particularly for magic items or any sort of item or money, is to reward someone, rather than it be a case where everyone's getting it bar someone. It's whoever excels gets something. The thing is, it's the same with the milestone stuff that I spoke about earlier. Like if you're like, let's say my guy in the group's doing less work in the group, right, but we're still leveling up at the same rate because we're doing the milestones. Like if I wasn't pulling my weight for something, these characters would be telling me like, go and do this, or what are you doing? The players, let them figure that stuff out. If somebody's being really lazy, let the players suss it out with each other. Or as a GM, just be like, what are you doing? Because you've got to do something at this time, and just pull it out them a bit, and then you can reward everyone.
Yeah.
Just try not to make a big deal out of it. That's all I would say. So Anything else on that? I think the next thing we'll move on to is maybe just the golden points we covered. I think everything else I wanted to speak about.
I mean, like Jordan was saying, like out of sync leveling up and like rewarding people with money, magic items, regular items, castles, whatever you decide to do. As soon as it becomes out of sync with the rest of the players, then just make sure that you've got a reason for doing it.
Yeah.
And I think, again, like I was saying earlier on, the thing to bear in mind is that, and again, this just might be me in the way that I think, that somebody getting something is going to be less of an issue than everybody having something that somebody else doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because, how you feel that something's unfair, you're very, very, very unlikely to turn around and go, well, I've got this thing that nobody else has. That's unfair. People in general are quite selfish and don't really think like that. So it's probably going to work in that reverse situation where you're the person that doesn't have anything and that you're wondering why and what you've done and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think to extend the olive branch to people that like that super hardcore thing, probably play a different system other than D&D. It doesn't suit itself to it. I mean, that's why there's other games out there that are more hardcore. But I would also say, look, if they know that that's the sort of game they're getting into, go ahead. That's I totally get it. Like the guy, although I'm actually, people weren't really on board with it and he's doing it anyway, but there's someone I know that does his games. He's like, you see all this stuff about advantage in D&D, I think it's rubbish. Instead, what I'll do is I'll give you a bonus based on like kind of different contextual or circumstantial things that happen. So you don't get flanking advantage, you just get like +2 to the roll, attack roll and stuff, so blah blah blah. Whereas people are kind of going, but I want my advantage. But there's other things that he's added in that makes it more hardcore. So there is like, if you do the recap, you get inspiration. If you do this, you get inspiration. But it means if you're a more passive player or just want a casual game, you're going to be penalised by both not getting levels up, but also not getting inspiration, but also not getting magic items. And it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like that is every mistake that I've just spoke about reason not to do it. Now, if you're running a game that people do want that really hardcore and potentially punishing experience, like because you're not committing to the same level as somebody else who could be obsessed with playing these sort of games, then go ahead. But I think generally, I don't like the idea, really, of it for the most part. I think the kind of main question you've got to ask if you're a GM is why are you putting in these different imbalances in the first place?
Yeah.
That's it. Are you wanting to reward enthusiastic players? And if so, that's okay to do it, but don't make other people... Don't kind of punish players that can't do certain commitments, I just spoke to somebody recently who was like, let's do a D&D kitty because I want to buy everyone equipment. And the question's kind of like, well, it's not technically in a game experience, but for the players around the table, it's like, we're just here to play casual games. This guy wants to run the next platform network of D&D, and everyone else is like, we're just hanging out, man. We just want to play a game.
Yeah.
So think about, and I actually said to him, forgot to tell you that, I said, just think about why you're doing it and why are people coming, that's it. Now, like I said, if you want to do the hardcore thing, that's fine, but just ask why you're putting an imbalance. And I wouldn't say things like rewarding someone that excels and giving them a magic item. I wouldn't call that like adding an imbalance. It's just rewarding someone. If you're going in and you're stacking the odds against players like that, but then you're also putting in combat where they get locked in a room with something 3 times their level, that's when you need to go, why is that even in there?
Yeah.
Strange Aeons does that exactly. They put you in that situation and it sucks for players, but they do it at the start of the game to set the scene, and it's basically punishment free, once it all finishes. So that's why they do it. It's a narrative tool. So you make sure you get something for it if you're putting in imbalances that could be perceived as unfair. That's all.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, it's just literally kind of popped into my head there, is if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're trying to reward players that are engaged as a way of keeping them engaged or in getting more role play from them, or whatever, if you've got a group that you've got 1 or 2 people that are quite outgoing and are and are more forward, and you've got a bigger amount of players that are more introverted and aren't as outgoing, then the danger is that when you're rewarding those players, you're doing it for the right reasons, because you want everybody to be engaged, you want to encourage everybody else, and you're kind of, you're showing them the carrot and you're hiding the stick. But the danger is at that point they go, well, why does so and so always get stuff and I don't? So just think about that and just tread that one carefully.
That's actually a good point, because I'm not somebody, certainly early on I wouldn't role play. I still don't really do voices because I'm crap at them, frankly. But I mean, that's fine, I don't mind role playing, but early on I wouldn't have role played like our early days, because it's just wasn't comfortable doing it. So I think it's about, like you mentioned something similar earlier on, just look at that person's balance for their effort. Like, even if they don't role play them, you can still prompt them, like, oh, what do you want to do? And they might go, instead of role playing, I say to the man, blah 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 blah, they might say like, oh, I would like to ask them about this, and they might have a cool idea. Even if they don't role play it, it still might be a good idea. So reward that as well, just see where their comfort level is. I mean, for the most part, a lot of people don't properly role play. If you don't know them that well, most groups I run with now do, but sometimes people's energy levels kind of downgrade a bit, or they're not sure how to communicate it in character, so they'll just say, I say something like this. And then if you're not sure how effective it is, make them do a roll. Keep it easy. But if it works, that's when you can reward them. So that's a good point about people that might be shyer. So I think that just takes us on to we've covered all of these, so it's just to recap a couple of golden rules. And for me, and just if there's any final thoughts, just to interrupt me. For me, one, games are a bit fun. So if you're going to be putting in imbalances, making things unfair and putting in unfair situations, make sure there's a reason for it, and make sure it's fun. You can have unfair games that are very fun. Borg is a good example, where you die in 2 hit points, but the game's built around dying, getting a new guy, jumping straight back in again. Alien's similar, although it's more around body horror, and people know, you set them up to think they're going to die, so when they do, it's okay. So make sure that regardless of what's happening, people have fun. I would say, it's just worth bearing in mind that there's more than one way to run a game as well. So if you feel like you're getting a bit of resistance as a GM, for example, the things you're doing, maybe other players are a bit irritated because you've taken away all half of the advantage stuff. And I mentioned the person taking away the flanking advantage, but what the guy's not realised after me suggesting Pathfinder, and he told me that's a dumb idea, was he's practically grafted off half of Pathfinder's rules and stuck it onto D&D, and it's like, well, you're basically playing Pathfinder, you're just doing it under D&D's name. But the fact is, like, other people in that game sometimes don't really enjoy it, but the guy constantly still throws the same stuff even after being talked to about it. So sometimes it's worth just going, right, why don't I try it another way, because there's more than one way to play a game, and just see if you enjoy it and if other people enjoy it. And if the answer's yes to all, just keep doing that, because each group is probably going to be different. And then I would just say that like, for example, in terms of unfair fights, if you're not intentionally, like, you make whoopsies and they happen, but if you're not sure, I tend to err a wee bit on the side of caution with a wee backup to make it harder if I need it. But for me, that my kind of ethos for it is, it's better to have players that kind of overpower your encounter because you were unsure how to kind of balance it. It's better to have those players stronger than your encounter than it is to have them totally demolished by it. Because again, well, it depends on the game, I suppose. If it's Cthulhu, I'd say you could do it the other way and be fine. But D&D is about slashing things, shooting spells and getting gold, basically. So let people do that in the game, That's my kind of closing golden rules, but if there's anything else to add, feel free. But otherwise...
No, I mean, I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head. At the end of the day, we're all sitting talking about playing the game, so what's the point in that? You want to have fun. And it is as simple as that. And the only kind of thing to tackle into it is the golden rule. Talk. Make sure you're talking to each other. As soon as that stops happening, as soon as you start staying in your own head and thinking things and not getting what you feel off your chest, it's gonna stagnate, and it's gonna go bad, and it's gonna go bad quick. So just talk.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter what it's about. If you're even if you're approaching a game that might not be the normal game, just talk to people about it, you know, because it's like Alien had said, it's going to be brutal, you're probably all going to die, you know, although we're okay with that sort of game. But if you were a group that wasn't okay with it and I just said it'll be different and then ran it, you'd probably be like, this game sucks. You know, whereas if you have that conversation with them, you can get a feel for what people want. Same thing for, that's basically it. It's always worth chatting about it, because otherwise you're just going to stress yourself out.
Yeah, and even if you're a player talking to another player, again, if you're going, I felt that I was
hard done by.
I was hard done by. I was picked on in that game, and talked to somebody and got, I'd see it this bit here when this happened. What did you think? Just see what they tell you, see what they think. And then if they go, well, actually, I thought it was maybe a bit harsh the way that you get there. And then at that point, then you're getting a bit of feedback that then lets you go, you know, if you have taken your pause for breath, you step back, you've thought about it, and, you know, you were letting it slide and you're not planning and talking to the GM about it, but you hear somebody else going, no, I think it was a bit unfair, then you go, right, okay, next time if anything happens, I'll say my piece.
Yeah, that's it. So you've basically heard our thoughts. So on dealing with unfair, you've heard a bit about what to do in an unfair situation, some examples of what could be considered unfair, or kind of concepts that might be inherently unfair, but why maybe you should do them and why maybe you should not do them. And we've also just spoke about general rules of how, well, regardless of how you decide to run the game, what's the golden rules for it. So that's our thing. Is there anything that's obvious that you've picked up on, or maybe you've played and you went, oh, they've not said that? Or as a GM, you might say, do you know what, these guys would benefit from some of my thoughts. We want to hear it, so you can let us know on YouTube, comments, well, basically anywhere that you can comment, because there's so many social medias. So YouTube, Discord, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well. So I think that's everything though. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's everything this time.
I think as I started with YouTube in case I forgot it. So thanks very much for listening and or watching. We'll get you in the next episode of the Beginner's Handbook. So see you from me.
And see you then.